سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله، والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين، الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين، والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimatul Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When one examines those events which shape the modern world, they'll find that amongst those events which gave a key feature to the world today was that event known as the scientific revolution. Within the 15th and the 16th century, when we saw the rise of modern science and the philosophical suppositions which go with modern science, this movement was one which shaped the modern world. And when this discussion was going on, you find that the religious community at that time, including the Muslim world, had to react to this discussion. When these discussions were going on, you find that there were two main responses which were given within the Muslim world, and each of these responses had flaws towards them. For example, you would find that there was one group of individuals, they would seek to say that this concept of modern science is something which opposes religion. They'll say on one level, science is the realm of fact and empiricism, whereas religion is the realm of belief and faith, that you have faith in Allah, and this is something which is outside of the realm of science. That science cannot establish that Allah exists, or the Quran is the book of God, or the Prophet Muhammad is a messenger. But on the other end, you find that another group emerged as a reaction to this event. The second group stated that everything in the Deen and the religion should be in accordance to modern science. So if there is a verse of the Quran, they'll ask that what does modern science say about this verse? If there is a hadith of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, they'll say that what does the modern science say about this hadith? In other words, when you see these two discussions and these two groups as a reaction, we need to ask ourselves that what does the Quran say about our relationship with modern science, and what do the traditions of Ahlul Bayt state about this? Because one of the key functions of this month of Muharram is that we seek to establish a worldview based upon the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. That one of the key functions of our relationship with Ahlul Bayt is that way in which Ahlul Bayt saw the world and existence and the society around them. That way in which they viewed the world is something which we seek to understand. Because the way you view the world has a profound impact upon your actions. For example, if you believe that this world is only limited to this material realm, then you won't get past the realm of materialism. But when we see that there are realities that are deeper towards that, then we come to an understanding that what is it that is the true reality of existence? In other words, if on the day of Ashura, we see Imam al-Hussein sacrificing a son like Ali Akbar, and we see him sacrificing a brother like Aba Fadl Abbas, there must be something which is rooted in the worldview of Imam al-Hussein that allowed him to make that sacrifice. Imam al-Hussein had a particular understanding, and because of that understanding, he was willing to go to this extent of submitting towards Allah. And we find this understanding in these lines of Imam al-Hussein on the day of Ashura, when he says, Al-Maut awla min rukub al-ar, that death is better than humiliation. Wal-ar awla min dukhul al-nar, and to be humiliated in this world is better than to fall into the fire. And then he says, Ana al-Husayn ibn Ali, ahmi ayalati abi, amdi ala deen al-nabi. He says, I am Hussein, the son of Ali. I will protect my family, and I will walk in the footsteps of my grandfather Rasulullah. In other words, Imam al-Hussein in this line, he shows that when I am willing to sacrifice my family and protect them, I am following the Deen of Rasulullah, and that worldview which the Deen of Rasulullah it gave, that is my worldview. And that's why in tonight's discussion, in order to mold our worldview, the subject of analysis is examining the relationship between religion and modern science, and we'll do so in the following stages. Number one, what two groups exist in the Muslim world that mention the relationship between religion and modern science? From the second level, what does the Quran say about the use of aql and reason? From the third level, how does the belief in the unseen refute the premise of modern science? And from the fourth level, how can we prove that Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam had knowledge of the ghaib or the unseen? You see, when we come to this discussion and we seek to understand what is the relationship between modern science and religion, we see that within the Muslim world, there were two reactionary measures when it came to the scientific revolution. From the first level were those individuals who said that religion has its domain, science has its domain, and there is no interaction between the two. Now, when we come to this view, you find the fault within this view is that there are a number of ayat and verses of the Quran that incite mankind to reflect upon the natural system of the world. In other words, if God was opposed to the study of science, then Allah wouldn't incite mankind, O mankind, reflect upon this creation. That, for example, in one verse he says, Inna fi khalqis samawati wal ard
واختلاف الليل والنهار والفلك التي تجري في البحر بما ينفع الناس وما أنزل الله من السماء من ماء فأحيا به الأرض بعد موتها. He says that within the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alteration of the day and the night, and the coming down of this water by which the dead land is come back to life, and the spreading of the animals upon it, and the moving of the winds, all of these are signs for those who reflect. In other words, if Allah feared the study of science, or if religion opposed the study of science, then religion would not make this claim that reflect upon reality. In other words, if I give you an example, if I have a fake passport in my hand, I'm not going to go to the TSA officer and tell him, examine my passport, look at my passport. But no, if that passport is real, then I have nothing to fear. Whether you look at it or you examine it or you don't, it doesn't change its reality. Over here, when Allah is making this claim, this is a refutation of all of those individuals who said that back in the day we didn't have science, thus we understood all of these different phenomenon like earthquakes, like these other different natural phenomenon, and religion would explain them. But you see, in the modern world, Islam is giving that pathway that when you want to understand any issue, come to the Quran, come to the perspective of the Quran, and the Quran incites towards aql and reason. But at the second level, and this second level is where you find a majority of the people, the second group that emerged in the Muslim world as a reaction to the scientific revolution is that group of people who sought to align everything in the religion with modern science. In other words, if you have the concept of wudu, they would say, what does modern science say about wudu? And if I can give you an example of this type of thought, we see that there arose a type of tafsir and commentary of the Quran called tafsir ilmi. These at-tafsir al-ilmi sought to examine the verses of the Quran in the light of modern science. You know, somebody like Muhammad Abdo, when he examined the event of Suratul Fil, when Abraha with his army, he comes to destroy the Kaaba, and Abdul Muttalib speaks with Abraha, and he says, "O Abraha, when you were on this journey, you stole some of my camels." Abraha says, "Oh man, you were supposed to be a holy individual. I am coming to destroy your Kaaba, your place of worship, and you're asking me that you stole my camels?" Abdul Muttalib, he replies by saying that in the way these camels have an owner myself, and it is my responsibility to protect them, in the same way the house of Allah has an owner, and it is his responsibility to protect the house. And the Quran says that at that point there were these birds. They came with stones in their beak and upon their claws, and they would drop it upon the army of Abraha. You see, the verses of the Quran are very clear that this was a miracle which God demonstrated to protect his house. But somebody like Muhammad Abdo falling into the trap that everything within the religion must be explained by modern science, he says that this verse of the Quran is a metaphor for smallpox. I say, where does a disease affect one side of the army and it doesn't affect the other side of an army? When you have a disease, when you have a pandemic, if I'm going to use that word and I'm allowed to do so, a pandemic doesn't look at, does the person have iman before I make them sick? Is this person a disbeliever before I make them sick? In other words, even if you go with that line of thought, it's a miracle. But this line of thought that explaining everything with modern science is very problematic. For example, when it comes to wudu, You find that they'll say there are other methods that'll make you more clean. But even if you use soap and you use water, that doesn't mean you can go and pray without wudu. In other words, when it comes to many of our rulings, Allah is showing that not everything can be understood by the intellect. If we look in the Quran and we examine what does the Quran say for us to use our intellect in, the Quran, for example, will say that when it comes to the natural system, as the verse I alluded to, it says use your intellect and your aql to understand creation. Another verse will say, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. That we will show them our signs in the horizons and in themselves until it becomes clear for them that Allah is the truth. So when it comes to yourself, use intellect. In other words, what is Allah saying? Allah is saying that intellect will allow you to understand that Allah exists. And the aql will allow you to understand that Rasulullah is there. And aql will allow you to come to the door of wilayah. But when you have accepted all of these realities, a point has to come where you put your aql and your intellect in prostration and in subservience before wahi and revelation. That's why Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, that is why Imam Zainul Abidin, in a tradition, he says, Inna deen Allah la yusabu bil uqul naqisat. That the religion of Allah is not going to be understood with deficient intellects. You know, us as speakers oftentimes will have question and answer sessions. And a person will ask, for example, that why is a dog najis? That why is a dog impure? You know, the real answer to that is what we find within the text of Sharia. That within the Hadith, within the Quran, this is what we find. Yes, there are elements of taharat which are related to purity, but the ultimate answer is that when it comes to the Sharia, we are bound by the text of the Quran and the text of the Hadith, whether you like it or you don't like it. You know, when you do wudu and you wipe your foot, you wipe the top of your foot. Naturally, when you're walking on the ground, what gets dirtier? The bottom of your foot gets dirtier. But over here, we don't say, oh Allah, why are we wiping the top of our foot? Why are we not cleaning the bottom of our foot? No, we find that this method is found in the Hadith, and beyond that, we do not have the right to go any farther. So you find both of these groups, one group which rejected the notion of natural study, and the second group which sought to align the Deen, everything in the Deen, with modern science. The point that they were missing is that science explains a portion of reality. It does not explain everything in existence. In other words, if somebody is claiming that religion is now obsolete because we have modern science, this statement is only applicable if modern science is able to solve all of the issues of mankind, which it hasn't. Modern science cannot solve the moral problem. Modern science cannot solve the spiritual condition of mankind which they're struggling with. In other words, science explains a portion of reality, but at the same time you need revelation. Because when you have modern science is based upon experimentation. In other words, science is the domain of the five senses. That you, by trial and error, you find out what is true and what is not true. But when it comes to wahi and revelation, over here there is no process of trial and error. Allah reveals to the Prophet Muhammad, and that revelation itself is the truth. You know, there is a verse of the Quran which gives us a principle of what are the sources of knowledge that we as a human being are allowed to use and should use. The verse in Surah An-Nahl, the 16th chapter of the Quran, it says, Wallahu akhrajakum min butuni ummahatikum la ta'lamuna shay'a. That Allah, He brought you forth from the wombs of your mother, and you didn't know anything. وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. But Allah, when you were in this state where you knew nothing, Allah, He gave you the sight, and He gave you hearing, and He gave you the heart so you could thank Allah. You know, from the first level, this ayat of the Quran is showing that when it comes to knowledge and understanding the world, the first level of knowledge is the five senses. But these five senses, they have a limitation. You know, when I'm in this room, right, I can see what is on this side of the wall, but I can't see what's on the other side of that wall over there because my sight has limitation. At the second level, I come to the intellect. In the way the five senses have a limit, my intellect can only take me so far. But when we look at this verse of the Quran, it says that the heart of a human being is a source of knowledge. Now over here the question is that what does this mean that the heart is a source of knowledge? You see, there is a type of ilm which even the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, such as Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi, the Imam would say that there is a type of ilm and knowledge that, O human being, you cannot acquire this knowledge by reading and learning and writing. But Imam as-Sadiq, in a famous tradition to Unwan al-Basri, he says, لَيْسَ الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ, that knowledge is not gained by learning. إِنَّمَا هُوَ نُورٌ يَقَعُ فِي قَلْبِ مَنْ يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ. But rather, ilm is a light which Allah places in the hearts of the one whom He wants to guide. You see, there is one type of ilm through the five senses, through experimenting, through reading, I acquire that ilm. But then there is a type of ilm when a person goes in the step of purity and he goes into the realm of ubudiyah and the service of Allah. Allah gives him that ilm, and that ilm is a nur and a light. That what is light? Light is something which is apparent in itself and it makes other things apparent. You see, in this room, if you turn off the light, everything is dark. But the moment light it turns out, you begin to see that things are apparent from the outward level. But this light which Allah gives, in the truest sense of that knowledge, it allows you to understand the realities of things. That's why Imam as-Sadiq in a tradition would say, Man amila bima alim, kufiya ma lam ya'lam. That the one who acts upon that which they know, Allah, that is sufficient for them to gain that which they don't know. In other words, act upon the knowledge you have, and that is sufficient for you to gain another type of knowledge. Allah, for example, in a verse of the Quran, He says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. That those who strive in our way, we will guide them towards our routes. We'll guide them through our paths that lead towards us. In other words, when it comes to knowledge, we recognize that there is a divine element to that knowledge. Oftentimes in a lecture, a khatib, he'll say a hadith. For one person, there is no impact. But another person will listen to that hadith of Ahlul Bayt, and it'll change the trajectory of their life. Why is that the case? That's the case because there was that element of tawfiq in that understanding. Imam al-Hussein from Karbala, from Mecca towards Karbala, he would invite a number of people. They wouldn't come with Imam al-Hussein. But on that journey, there was an individual by the name of Zuhair ibn al-Qayn. You know, how does the Maqatil describe Zuhair? It says as the Imam is going to Karbala, Imam al-Hussein at the halting stations would stop on one side, Zuhair would stop on another side. In other words, Zuhair would not even meet the Imam. But at one halting station, the Imam sends a messenger to Zuhair. And when the Imam sends that messenger, he says that Hussein is calling you. Zuhair says that I won't go. At that moment, the wife of Zuhair says that the son of Fatima is calling you, but you're not going. At that moment, Zuhair goes to the side of Imam al-Hussein. You know, the Maqatil don't record what conversation occurred between Sayyid al-Shuhada and Zuhair. But what it says is that at that moment, Zuhair says to the Imam that I will join you on this journey, and he says to his servant, you are free to go. This Zuhair is that individual that Imam al-Hussein in his final moments, he would say, Ya Habib ibn al-Madahir, wa ya Muslim ibn al-Awsaja, wa ya Zuhair ibn al-Qain. In other words, this individual who wasn't even with the Imam at the beginning of the journey, the Imam in his final moments is calling him by name. Now, why is it that Zuhair gets this honor, others don't get that honor? You find on one level it is because the heart of Zuhair was enlightened. And it was enlightened with ma'rifah and that understanding of who Sayyid al-Shuhada was. In other words, there is a type of ilm which Allah He gives. And our efforts in this world make us eligible for that ilm, but ultimately it comes from Allah. You see, when the Quran in another verse, when it describes this type of knowledge, it says that there is an individual who has a knowledge which is unlike anyone else. And that is the verse of the Quran which says, وَيَقُولُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَسْتَ مُرْسَلًا. That, O Messenger, when they say to you, when those who disbelieve say that you are not a messenger, قُلْ كَفَى بِاللَّهِ شَهِيدًا بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكُمْ وَمَنْ عِنْدَهُ عِلْمُ الْكِتَابِ. That, O Messenger of God, at that moment when they say that you are not a messenger, say to them, enough between me and you as a witness is number one, Allah, and number two, the one who has the knowledge of the entire book. You see, this knowledge of the book is not just a knowledge which is gained by studying, but this is a type of knowledge which Allah He gives and something which the modern scientific world doesn't recognize. In other words, Allah is saying, Ya Rasulullah, when it comes to your nubuwah, when it comes to your prophethood, there are two pieces of evidence. The first is Allah, the second is that individual who has been given the knowledge of the entire book. You know, in mantiq, in logic, we say that an evidence has to be the same type as the claim. In other words, if I want to know, if I make a claim which is scientific, the evidence should also be in the realm of science. For example, when I want to find out what is the boiling point of water, I will use experimentation. I'll notice that at 100 degrees Celsius, every single time water begins to boil. So based upon experimentation, I know that my claim that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius is accurate. When it comes to philosophy, I'll use the principles of philosophy and logic to understand the issue. But over here, the claim is what? In this ayat, the claim is that Rasulullah is a messenger and a prophet. In other words, that dalil, that evidence for the messengership of Rasulullah must be of the same type as the claim that it's made. In other words, if a risala and messengership is the name for the connection with the ghaib and the unseen, then the one who is a dalil for the messengership of Rasulullah must have a connection with the unseen. That if risala and prophethood is what? If it is proved by a mu'jiza and a miracle, then the one who is mentioned as a dalil and an evidence for the messengership of Rasulullah, his very being must be a miracle. So when the Quran over here says that the one who has the knowledge of the book is an evidence for the messengership of Rasulullah, this very person was the knowledge of the book. This individual himself is a miracle. And when you look at the tafasir, you find that is none other than Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. That Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, to call Amir al-Mu'mineen a scientist in the modern sense of the word is a disrespect to Amir al-Mu'mineen. The reality of the Imam is something which is far beyond that. When you look at the different statements of the Imam, you begin to see what is true knowledge. For example, in one statement, the Imam, he says, Ma admara imra'un fi qalbihi shay'an. That a person doesn't hide anything in their heart, illa wa dhahara ala qasamati wajhe wa lafatati lisaneh. That a person doesn't hide anything in their heart, except for it makes itself apparent upon his facial expressions and the mistakes of his tongue. Amir al-Mu'mineen is showing, O human being, that within your subconscious, that which you are hiding, that which is over there, you will make it apparent through the mistakes that you make. In other words, if you want to be truthful and honest, if you want to protect yourselves from mistakes, then purify yourself from your heart to your outward action. I'll give you an example of this in history of how this hadith had played out. It stated that when Rasulullah was returning from the expedition of Tabuk, and then when the camel of Rasulullah was passing through a valley known as Aqaba, a group of individuals, they conspired that they would scare the camel of Rasulullah, and Rasulullah would fall into that valley and he would pass away. But at that moment, Jibreel would reveal to Rasulullah who those individuals are. And the hadith, it says that Rasulullah would tell Hudayfa al-Yamani. That's why Hudayfa was called the one who would distinguish between a mu'min and a hypocrite. One day, when they wanted to know whether the person was a believer or a hypocrite, they would look after the death of Rasulullah. If Hudayfa did not recite their funeral prayer, they would know this man is a munafiq and a hypocrite. When they would notice that Hudayfa would do this, certain individuals, they would come to Hudayfa and they would say, Oh Hudayfa, was I one of those individuals that tried to scare Rasulullah? In other words, if there was a crime over here and somebody's shoes got stolen, if I go up to that person and I say to him that, was I the thief? What am I doing? In this mistake, I am showing that I am guilty over here. Amir al-Mu'mineen's ilm is saying that which you are hiding in your heart makes itself apparent upon the tongue. So you find all of these different realities show that there is a type of ilm which is a light, a type of knowledge which modern science doesn't recognize, and you find that our belief in the Quran shows that this type of ilm is from the ghaib and the unseen. You see, when the Quran, it starts, it says, Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِي هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That this book has no doubt in it. It is a guide for the God conscious. And what is the first sign of the muttaqeen and the God conscience that the Quran mentions? الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. That the first sign of a believer is that a believer believes in the unseen. That's why this tenet over here shows that there is a portion of reality beyond modern science. You know, when we look at the ulama within the school of Ahlul Bayt, there was an individual by the name of Nasiruddin at-Tusi. Nasiruddin at-Tusi, you know, when you go to a classroom and you study cosine, tangent, all of these different functions in trigonometry, you find that Nasiruddin Tusi was the founder of these functions. And even when NASA decided to name a crater on the moon, NASA called it the Tusi crater. Tusi was an individual. He went into the sciences, but he had a metaphysical worldview that allowed him to understand reality. You know, when they were burying Nasiruddin at-Tusi, he had initially made the wasiyah that bury me in Najaf by Amir al-Mu'mineen. After they begin, you know, the process of getting the graves, Tusi is somebody who's old. Tusi sees Amir al-Mu'mineen in his dream. And Amir al-Mu'mineen says, "Oh Tusi, you want to be buried by me for shafa'ah and intercession? There are two sources of intercession by you in Baghdad." In other words, Tusi, when he lived in Baghdad, the Imam says that go get buried by Imam Musa al-Qadim and Imam Muhammad al-Jawad. Now Tusi wants to be buried, but the Sharia, it says that your legs are to be stretched out. You cannot bend the body. He says that if you are going to place me in front of my Imam, then I want to have proper adab. And that proper adab is that when you stretch me out, when you lay me on the ground, right upon my grave, وَكَلْبُهُمْ بَاسِطٌ ذِرَائِهِ بِالْوَسِيدِ, that their dog lay stretched out in front of them. In other words, an individual who has understood the Quran and the framework of the Quran, the studying of the natural universe doesn't take him away from his deen. The studying of the natural universe doesn't take him away from his love for Ahlul Bayt. And you find this is that reality of this knowledge. You see, one of the questions that is asked when it comes to the day of Ashura is that if Imam al-Hussein knew what would happen, why did he go to Karbala? From one level of this answer, the more knowledge an individual is given of this type, you find the more challenges that individual he faces. And what are the challenges the Imam he faced? That he saw the martyrdom of his son Aliul Akbar. And he saw the martyrdom of his infant. But without a doubt, one of those challenges is that the Imam would know what would happen after Karbala. You know, the day which has passed is the day of Arbaeen. The day of Arbaeen is that day where Sayyida Zainab went to the grave of her brother. You know, in the final moments of Imam al-Hussein, when the Imam was surrounded from all sides and there was arrow after arrow in the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada, it's stated that Sayyida Zainab, she comes out and she sees the Imam and she says, "Anta akhi?" That are you my brother Hussein? Ya Rasulullah, hadal Hussein al-murammalu bid-dima. That, oh Rasulullah, this is your Hussein who is covered in blood. You know, each of you have had a family member that's passed away. You know, whenever anyone passes away, there are two moments which are the most difficult. The first moment is the moment of their passing. The second moment is when you go to their grave for the first time. The day of Ashura was that first moment for Zainab. But the day of Arbaeen is that moment where Zainab, she goes to the grave of her brother Abu Abdullah. You know, when Ahlul Bayt, they were leaving Sham, they were leaving Damascus, Imam Zainul Abidin, he said, "Oh Yazid, give us a house to mourn in." Because every time these women would cry from Karbala to Kufa, Kufa to Sham, your soldiers would whip these women, they would hit these women, that they haven't had a proper chance to mourn. So they give him that house. Then the Imam says, "Oh Yazid, all of those items which you have taken, return those items towards us." You know, the first thing to come back was a flag. The moment that alam it comes, all of the women, they begin to say, "Wa Abbasa, Wa Abbasa." You find after that 2 earrings, they come back. The moment those earrings, they come, all of the women, they look towards Rabab. That daughter of the Imam would wear those earrings, is buried within that prison in Sham. But you know, after that, a ring, it comes back. You know which ring this was? Mukhtar, he catches a man. Mukhtar says, "Oh man, what did you do on the day of Ashura?" That man, he says, everyone was eluding the body of Hussein. Somebody would take the amama of Hussein. Somebody would take the shirt of Hussein. But I saw that on the hand of Hussein was a ring. I would try to take that ring, but it wouldn't come off. So at that moment, I take my dagger. I begin to cut the finger of Abu Abdullah. You know, after that, all of the heads are returned to the members of the family of the Prophet. That Layla would take the head of Ali Akbar, and Kulthum would take the head of Abbas, and Rabab would take the head of the 6-month infant. But then one head, it comes. The moment that head is brought, all of the women, they begin to stand, and they say, "Wa Husayna, wa Ghariba, wa Madluma." They begin to cry for Abu Abdullah. Then that moment it comes where the family of Rasulullah is leaving Sham. As they're leaving Sham, Imam Zainul Abidin says, "Oh my Aunt Zainab, shall we return to Medina or should we go towards Karbala?" That may Allah grant you the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein upon the day of Arbaeen. Sayyidah Zainab says, "Let's go towards Karbala." The riwayah says that at that moment, Jabir ibn al-Abdullah al-Ansari was in Karbala. That Jabir had become blind. He had gone with his servant Ati al-Ju'fi. You know, when Jabir goes to the grave of Imam al-Hussein, the riwayah, it says, "Ikhtasala bil-Furat," that he does ghusl by the Furat. And then after that, he goes to the grave of the Imam. And Jabir, he says, "Ya Habibi, Ya Hussein," that, "Oh Hussein, why is it that you don't reply to me, O Hussein?" Jabir, he begins to cry. He falls upon the grave of Sayyid al-Shuhada. But as Jabir falls upon the grave from the direction of Sham, one caravan, it begins to come. Ati al-Jofi says, "Oh Jabir, there is a group of individuals who is coming to this land." Jabir says, "O Atiyah, is there any men from amongst that caravan?" Atiyah says, "Oh Jabir, there is one old man. His back has become bent, his hair is white." Jabir says, "Take me towards that man." Then Jabir says, "Oh man, who are you?" The Imam says, "Oh Jabir, ana al-Zainul Abidin, I am Ali ibn al-Hussein." Jabir says, "Oh Zainul Abidin, Atiyah has told me that an old man has come. But oh Zainul Abidin, you are a youth, you are somebody who is young." The Imam says, "Oh Jabir, Asham, Asham, Asham." Then after that, the Imam, he says his famous line. He says, "Ya Jabir, ha huna qutilat rijaluna." That oh Jabir, oh, he says, "Oh Jabir, over here our men were killed." And then he says, "Ya Jabir, ha huna dubihat atfaluna." And oh Jabir, over here our children were slaughtered. "Ya Jabir, ha huna subiya nisauna." Oh Jabir, over here our women were taken as captives. Then you know what the Imam says to Jabir? He says, "Oh Jabir, ha huna Sakata Abu Abdullah." Oh Jabir, this is that spot where Abu Abdullah fell to the ground. Oh Jabir, this is that spot where Abu Abdullah he fell, oh Jabir. Then the Imam says, "Oh Jabir, step back." Why should Jabir step back? Then that moment it came where Sayyida Zainab wanted to do the ziyarah of her brother. You know, when Zainab, she comes to the grave of Abu Abdullah, Sayyida Zainab, she says, "Oh my brother, forgive Zainab." I said, "Oh Zainab, why are you asking for forgiveness?" Sayyida Zainab says, "Oh my brother, you had given me an amana, you had given me a trust. Oh my brother, I left that amana within Sham, I left Sukaina in Sham." You find after that, Sayyida Zainab, she says, "Oh Zainul Abidin, where is the grave of my brother Abbas?" You know, Aba Fadl Abbas was buried by the Furat. Sayyida Zainab, she goes to the grave of Aba Fadl Abbas. Then after that, Imam Zainul Abidin, he takes the head of Imam al-Hussein, he begins to place it in the grave. You know, when they buried the Imam on the 13th of Muharram, the head of the Imam wasn't there. That on the 13th of Muharram, when Imam Zainul Abidin came towards Karbala, Banu Asad was looking at the bodies. Imam Zainul Abidin had told Banu Asad that you make one grave for the companions. Then after that, they came to the Imam and they said, "Oh man, there is a body by the Furat. When we pick one side of the body, the other side falls on the ground. And when we pick the other side of the body, the other side falls on the ground." Imam Zainul Abidin would say, "That is the body of my uncle Abbas. I will bury that body." But then the riwayah, it says that Imam Zainul Abidin, he places his Abba on the ground. He collects the pieces of his father. He says, "Ya Rasul Allah adrikni." He buries his father in the ground and he writes on their grave, هذا قبر أبي عبد الله الذي قتل غريب وأدشانا. And this day of Arbaeen is that day where the head is returned to the grave of Imam al-Hussein. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين. Ya Allah, we ask through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, allow us to be amongst the zawar of Imam al-Hussein on the day of Arbaeen. You know, ulama have stated that as the day of Arbaeen finishes, there is one final visitor at the grave of Imam al-Hussein. That visitor is the one who comes from Medina. And when she comes from Jannatul Baqi, they say that one hand is upon her broken rib. And she goes and she does the ziyarah of the grave of Imam al-Hussein. Ya Allah, we ask through the right of Fatima al-Zahra, salamullahi alayha, that wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Wherever they're sick and ailing, cure them. Allow us to benefit from the teachings of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, and grant us the shafa'ah of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And we pray for the hastening of the reappearance of the 12th of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم.